See, some of us in here are old enough to have the same memory as me of the 1960s. If you know, the Beatles had somewhere around 30 number one hits at the top of the charts. And one of those hits is a song that goes, "All you need is love. All you need is love." And then the trumpets, dun, 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 dun. You know, you might remember that. Interestingly, as well, that was the, fir- the first time that there was a multinational television broadcast, 1967. If you can believe a time when the world was not globally connected in any kind of visual way. But it wasn't until 1967. And that song, "All You Need Is Love," was Britain's contribution to the celebration of connecting the world by television simultaneously. Well, those were days of intense conflict and not love. Vietnam War was raging and social revolution. The Cold War was heating up and intensifying. And so in some ways, this love, war, conflict, tension was in the air. And there was a time of social revolution in general, Woodstock in 1969, that really featured many of the changes that were happening socially, especially in the area of ethics and morals. Well, absolutes were being thrown out, and in its place was ethical relativism. It took its classic shape in the words of a philosopher, Joseph Fletcher, who is recognized as the founder of situation ethics. And if you know anything about situation ethics, in this period of conflict when love was in the air, Fletcher put at the very center of his ethics the concept of love. Love was the means and the ultimate goal of every decision that we were to make. There were no absolute standards to help make decisions. There was this sort of squishy, nebulous notion of love that was the bottom line for evaluating any moral action. Well, on the surface, that sort of rings okay with us. I mean, isn't it true that for both the Old and the New Testament, the greatest commandments are to love God and to love our neighbor? And so at the surface, there is this similarity and ring between the two of them. But the problem with Joseph Fletcher's situation ethics is that love had no content. It was a rather vacuous idea out there that was to inform everything we did, but there was no content to the information that was to be at the heart of the ethical system. The content of love was completely empty, and in the subjective mushiness, Fletcher put in pragmatism without any external guidance or scales to weigh the value of particular actions. Love, whatever that happened to mean, justified any means. So what is love? What is love then? And most importantly, what does it mean to love God? Well, we're not left in a vacuum. God didn't leave us floating out there with nothing to grab onto. And he has spoken to us in his word with instruction about love itself. And our theme of chapel this year is the idea of loving our God. And I'd like us to look at the central text from the Old Testament on that topic, which was just read for us in Deuteronomy 6. Known as the Shema. Hear Israel. Shema, the word for to hear. Hear Israel. Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is one. And you shall love Yahweh your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your might. Well, verse 4 sets the backdrop for this when it claims that God is one. And the basic concept of that is that he is utterly unique, even as one of the first song that you chose, there's no one like God, that he is utterly unique. And you can see this, for example, in, of all places, the Song of Solomon, when Solomon is praising his bride, and he says, she is one, the only one of her mother. In Song of Songs 6:9. Same exact word used here in Deuteronomy of one. So it's a way of saying that God is utterly unique. There is no one else like him among all of the other things that we can imagine in the universe. He is one of a kind, and therefore, verse 4 sets up then for the command to love him. Because Yahweh, our God, is unique, special, he is worthy of our love. I'd like us to take a couple minutes, just look briefly at each of the terms in this verse: to love, heart, soul, and strength. The concept of this particular word for love has sort of two sides to it. One side is sort of the rational choice that is made with love, a devotion to something. And we see that actually in the very next chapter of Deuteronomy, where God says that he has chosen to set his love on Israel. He loved them and chosen them. And so in that sort of context, you can see the idea that you select out that which you want to have devotion to, and allegiance to. The other side of the coin is the emotional side of it. Love as an affection. And you can see that with Isaac's love for Rebekah. And, he's just head over heels crazy for this woman. And that word love is used for that and has all of the emotional freight and weight that we could have as well behind that word. And Ruth illustrates for us both sides of the coin at the same time, when at the end of the book of Ruth, chapter 4, verse 15, it says that Naomi is loved by Ruth. And you look through that book, and it shows someone who is in tears with affection, unwilling to leave and part with her mother-in-law, and at the same time, someone who not only has the affection and the emotion, but also makes choices in life that are in alignment with the commitment and the devotion that she has to her mother-in-law. And so the theme of covenant loyalty comes very strong through the book of Ruth as illustrations of what this notion of love means. So to love Yahweh, our God, means for us to have affection and allegiance and commitment to him that stays with him in thick and thin. And we're to do that with all of our heart. In the ancient psychology, if you will, they felt things in their body, in their gut, and in their heart. When you have an emotional surge, adrenaline pulses and you feel your heart. And so they naturally connected these kinds of emotions and such with the organ of the body that we know as the heart. So it's the center of our feeling, our wishes, even our intellect. The word for mind in the Old Testament is the word for the heart. And it's also the center where we make decisions. The center of the will is the heart. And so to love God with all our heart means that our emotions, our intellect, our wishes, and our decisions align with the love of God. Love him with all our soul. Those are all of the functions of the human being, not just the immaterial, but even the whole person, the body itself. And the word for soul is often used for the whole person. We use the word soul in the same way in English when we say, save our soul, SOS. I don't want my immaterial part to be saved and leave my carcass on the beach when I'm shipwrecked. I want my body as well to be saved. So to love God with our soul is our whole person. And then our strength. That word usually just means much. It's the adverb in Hebrew for much. And so it's a way of saying love God with all of our muchness, if you will. And in fact, when the book of Kings extols Josiah, it says, he repeats this phrase right out of Deuteronomy, that he loved God with all his heart and all of his soul and all of his muchness, in the context of him taking all of his resources and all of his authority to bring reform to ancient Israel and to clean the temple and to reestablish worship as it should be. So he loved God with all of his muchness. Everything that we are, everything that we have, belongs to God ultimately, and Deuteronomy 6:5 compels us to love God in that way. But Moses doesn't leave it there with just an abstract discussion about emotions and intellect and will. Moses goes on to illustrate for us what concretely it means to love God. And so in the following chapters, from Deuteronomy 6 through Deuteronomy 11, Moses takes Israel through a number of important lessons that they have had up to that point in their experience since the Exodus, to encourage them in the ways in which they can love God. And so I'm just going to, like skipping a stone, I'm going to touch each of these chapters and the theme that each of these chapters brings up for us on the ways in which we love God. What does it mean to love God? Okay, Moses has an answer for us. First, the rest of chapter 6, it's devoted to teaching our children to pass on the faith to the next generation, and to do that with a whole lifestyle. So you see in verse 6, all these words that I command you today, I'll come back to all these words in a minute, that shall be on your heart. You'll teach them diligently to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk in the way, and when you sit down, when you rise up, and bind them as a sign on your hand and in between your eyes, on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on the city gates. It's not just an individual thing, it is a community effort. It's a community effort to love God and to pass the faith to the next generation. So in community application, a couple Psalms came to mind, Psalm 71:18. So even to old age and gray hairs, Lord, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation. So the psalmist, in the context of corporate worship, is praying that God extends his life at least to the point where he can pass it on to another generation. Psalm 73:15. In Psalm 73, the psalmist is at the edge of rebellion, sick and tired of seeing the prosperity of the wicked and to see the righteous not flourish. And he's frustrated and wonders, why have I bothered to keep the faith? And then he has a renewed realization of the glory of God when he goes into the temple and worship. And he confesses his wrong attitude in this song. And he says that if I had spoken this way, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. So the failure to bring praise to God and faithfulness in your life to God does damage to the next generation. And so we see in chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, Moses says, love God by keeping the faith in your whole lifestyle for the sake of the next generation. to whom you will pass the faith to. Chapter 7, love God by your commitment to holiness. Now, if you read the chapter, it's one of the more grim texts in all the Old Testament because it's the instruction for Israel to go to war against the Canaanites. Now, in context, Israel should drive out the Canaanites in order to set the land apart, sanctify the land for the purposes of devotion as a nation that serves God as a center for his kingdom. And this is a theocracy that is being set up, and these verses don't apply to us today. And in fact, I would even argue that they don't apply to us in the form of a culture war either, which is raging in my home country, as we all know from the recent election. And the church has taken up the mantle of a culture war as its way of loving God. And I think that gets it just as wrong as it would to take up arms in a theocratic conquest of another people today. Wrong context, wrong testament. But the notion, though, of commitment to sanctification is still there for us. And just so you see, it's central to this chapter 7. In the instruction for Israel to be radical in breaking down the altars of the Canaanites and their Asherim and burn them with fire and pulverize their carved images, for you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession. So how does the church, how do Christians show themselves as a treasured possession of God? The early church understood this. They didn't take up arms against the Roman Empire. They didn't complain against the emperor for the policies that they didn't like. They took care of the sick. And when plague went through the cities, they took care of the sick. They buried the dead. The children that were set aside to die from exposure, they adopted the children and they took them in. They treated the slaves of their household as equals in the Lord. Men honored their wives, and wives didn't take after the crazy new Roman woman. That was the thing of the day, and Paul warned against. So the Christians showed by their lifestyle and by their love for one another and their neighbors that they were unique and special and sanctified and set apart. And so I would suggest that in this chapter that we take from it the notion of showing God and the world that we are holy by our love. And in fact, in Leviticus 19, that's exactly what that chapter does. It says, be holy like the Lord. It ends with the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. Show your love for God by passing on the faith through total lifestyle, by commitment to holiness, and third, by commitment to your dependence on God. Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses recounts the story of the manna in the wilderness and how God humbled Israel by letting them get hungry at times and then providing for them so they would learn their dependence on the Lord for everything. A very difficult lesson for us in affluent cultures who are enjoying the benefits of that. A hard lesson for us to learn. The manna taught Israel dependence, and it also taught them not to be presumptuous and not to put the Lord to the test. And Moses discusses those notions as well in Deuteronomy 8. And of course, we know that our Lord in the wilderness underwent temptations and issues of bread and putting God to the test were very prevalent and in the forefront of that wilderness experience of his as well, when he relived as himself the embodiment of the new and true Israel the ways of God. So the psalmist says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, forget not all of his benefits." Dependence on God. Psalm 116:1, "I love the Lord because he heard my voice." We love God by remembering the things that he has done for us and declaring those things before other people. Love the Lord by passing on the faith, by commitment to holiness, by total dependence on him. And then Moses says, you love the Lord by humble self-appraisal. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, Moses reminds Israel, don't say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust out the Canaanites, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me to possess the land. Well, Israel might have been tempted to get puffed up that they were given this gift. And throughout this chapter 9, Moses recounts the episode of the golden calf and the idolatry that Israel committed and all the ways that they failed in the wilderness, to remind them that it's not due to their own righteousness that they are in any way special. And so they are to love God by remembering their shortcomings and remembering his grace and forgiveness. This is a matter of the heart, Moses says. Psalm 51:17, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart you will not despise. Love the Lord our God by passing the faith to the next generation through total lifestyle, commitment to holiness, by dependence on God, by humble self-appraisal and recognition of God's grace, and then by attending to God's instructions for life. Deuteronomy 11. Just moving through the chapters as Moses illustrates for us what it means to love God. In chapter 11, Moses returns to much of the exact same language that he had used in the opening of chapter 6. The triad, loving God with all your heart, loving God with all your soul, keeping his word, which was the very next thing in chapter 6 that he mentioned, and you put it on the lintels of your house and, on your hands and forehead. In other words, it's everywhere that you can see, everything you do, everything you think, everywhere you go. God's instructions are to be there. Deuteronomy 11:18, you shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand and on the frontals between your eyes, and you shall teach them to your children. And he's just repeating to the same instruction. It's a bookend, an inclusio, with what he had started out with in chapter 6. He's come full circle to that again. And everything in between is concrete illustration of what it means to love God. Moses directs us to all of the instructions to live justly and mercifully, as summarized, I already mentioned, in Leviticus 19. I encourage you to read Leviticus 19. Okay, you get bored with the sacrifices. I get it. Read chapter 19, though, because Israel's commanded to be holy, to be distinct and set apart. And it goes through the whole chapter talking about what it means to look out for the poor, to look out for the foreigner, to not throw a stumbling block in the way of someone who has a disability, to pay fair wages to your employees. All of these ways that are very concrete and specific about how we show ourselves to be God's people. Summarized by Micah in Micah 6:8, to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly. Those are words that resonate from these chapters of Deuteronomy. And of course, then it brings it back together again in the two great commands affirmed by Jesus in the gospel, to love God and to love our neighbor. We love God by loving our neighbor. Well, how does that love come about? I'm going to go back to just a couple verses in Deuteronomy 10, where Moses says where this love comes from. He starts out in verse 12, what's God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. There it is again. The commandments and the statutes that I'm commanding you today for your good, to keep them. And then he says, I've got to finish reading these couple of verses. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth and all that's in it, another song that you had chosen for us to sing this afternoon. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring, that's you, after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. And then here's the punchline, verse 16. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart. What's that mean? No longer be stubborn. To circumcise the heart, to cultivate the inner life that directs itself to God, to tend to the interior life. Prayer, meditation on God's word, thinking on God in community with each other as we are right here, to encourage one another, to tend to the interior life, because it's not the facade on the outside, as the Pharisees often thought, that has the appearance of religion, but it's what's in the heart. This command anticipates Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, when Moses returns to the problem that Israel has, that they are stubborn, that they do fail. And there'll come a time when they'll go into captivity. But then he says that the Lord God will bring them out of the land to restore them to what the promises were. And then verse 6, and the Lord your God will circumcise your heart. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God, you know it, with all of your heart and all of your soul. So Moses has here two sides of this. He says, on the one hand, take it on yourself to the responsibility of tending to the inner life. At the same time, he says, ultimately, this is a gift of God, a gift of God's Spirit. And this anticipates the new covenant that Hosea starts to show glimmers at, Isaiah, and most explicitly in Jeremiah, and in the prophet Ezekiel as well. And it all comes to a head, if you will, when Jesus inaugurates the new covenant by his death on the cross, sends his Spirit to his church. And from there, Paul takes that up and talks a lot about the pneumatic life, the Spirit-filled life, to walk, to keep in step with the Spirit. Paul's admonitions for us to attend closely to our relationship with God, because it's a relationship, like human relationships. Not completely identical, but like human relationships. And if you neglect them, they decay. When you attend to them and cultivate them and nourish them, they flourish. And God says, as we draw near to him, he will draw near to us. I'd like to close with reading Psalm 63 as a closing prayer in attending to these things of loving God by passing the faith to the next generation, committing ourselves to holiness, acknowledging our dependence on him, humble self-appraisal, attending to his instruction, ultimately, though, to tending to our hearts, our inner life. Would you pray with me, Psalm 63? O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh, it faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and your glory. Because of your covenant love, it's better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul then will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. My soul clings to you, and your right hand upholds me. Amen.